Thank you all for coming to tonight's Learning Lab. We're grateful to have this time together. And like the Bay, we're all connected. So thank you for being here. And we'll begin in a moment. We just want to go over a brief tech orientation before we begin the program and some organizational information for some new folks in the room. Thank you so much. And as always, we greatly appreciate your feedback. It helps us to improve our program. So I'll also put a link in the chat for everyone to open up and just to complete at the end. Just as a friendly reminder, we ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation to avoid background noise. And should you need to get up and move around, we please ask you to turn off your camera. And last, if you have any questions, please hold those to the end, or you can use the chat function and one of our IPC staff will do their best to help you. All right, thank you again. My name is Sarah. I'm one of Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake's outreach coordinators and program managers. As you can see, this is a great group photo of everyone. This was at one of our last strategic planning meetings. Next, let's just take a quick look at the program lineup. As you can see, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll open with a reflection. We'll get to meet our panelists, and then we will have time for Q&A at the end. And as always, we'll close with a prayer. So now I'd like us to take a moment to acknowledge this land and these waters that were stewarded by many who came before. Please join us in recognition, for today we hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were beloved by many who came before. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, towards one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. And we ask you to honor and learn from their intimate connection, love, and appreciation of these sacred land and waters. Then there's a link in the chat. We encourage you to learn more, but just keep in mind it's a snapshot in history of about 1,000 years when we know there are more than 15,000 years of Indigenous history here. And now, just for a sweet and simple reflection as a prayer for new beginnings this spring. Oh, Father, as the season of spring unfolds, we thank you for the gift of new beginnings. May your grace renew our spirits and inspire us to embrace fresh opportunities. Help us to shed the burdens of the past and blossom in faith, hope, and love. Guide us in our journeys and let your light shine upon our paths. Amen. So thank you so much for taking those moments of reflection. I want to just take a moment of gratitude for all of our supporters that fund our work and make it possible. And as you can see, we also want to make mention that because of our generous supporters, as you can see on the next slide, we are an organization that connects congregations to environmental partners and local governments and other faith communities. So it gives us the capacity to help do community outreach and so much more. If you look on the next slide, we'll encourage folks that are here tonight that haven't already signed a pledge to do so. As you can see on the map there, it's a growing movement. There's a lot of people joining. And if you look in the chat, there's a link that we'll encourage you to check out. And next, I cannot forget to mention we have our final 2025 Fall Faithful Green Leaders Training this October. So for any new green teams in the room, please RSVP. And last but not least, we always have many available resources, action kits, trees, information on plants, just about anything you can think of to get your creation care team going. So please keep us in mind. And now I think we're ready to just delve straight into the topic of tonight's discussion. This is a continuation of our ongoing talks about invasives throughout the Chesapeake Bay region with a focus on invasive plant removal and their connection to healthy waterways. So our first speaker of the evening is Kari Wurth, and she's a forest Health Technician with the Department of Natural Resources, Forest Service, and as a U.S. Coast Guard veteran, she found her calling in conservation and natural resource management, and she's been studying quite a bit at the University of Maryland. She was offered an opportunity to lead a crew of military veterans in the Maryland DNR Veterans Conservation Corps, where she discovered the fulfillment of hands-on restoration work. We're very lucky to have her today. She's going to talk a little bit more about some incredible projects she's done in the area, and I don't want to waste any more time. I'd like to open up the floor. Kari, please feel free to unmute and introduce yourself to our audience. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kari Wurth. Again, I'm a forest health specialist with the Maryland Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources. Today, we're going to go over invasive species ID and management techniques for the Chesapeake Bay for some of our common invasives in the area. I want to start off by showing you guys this nice, we can see one of our favorites. We have, I'm sorry, we've got the Bradford pear in full bloom. This is one of our projects that we're actually working on right now. This is going to be about 10 acres of removal with a forestry mulcher, and then we're going to come back in, hopefully treat with herbicide next season, and then plant it, hopefully. So that'll be really cool. Next slide, please. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about why we would target the invasive species, like what does this have to do with overall health of the Chesapeake Bay, invasive plant profile and management techniques, and then we're going to do a little ID pop quiz. Next slide. All right, so just to kind of give you guys an overview, so overall invasive plant species and pests as well, although we're not going to go into pests tonight, we're more focusing on the plants. They're an overall threat to Maryland's forests. Almost all of our forests and urban tree canopies are heavily invaded with invasive species to one varying degree or another. So the spread of invasive plants coupled with the increased deer population, so you see a lot of deer browse out there. If you happen to notice, if you go out and look at your forest floor, you are not seeing the regeneration of all those oak and hickory species that we're used to seeing here in Maryland. And we have, when I'm going out, I am not seeing in my forest health surveys the regeneration that we need to see on the ground in order to have healthy, thriving forests here in the next, 50, 60, 100 years to come. Climate change is also in effect and will lead to an increase in the spread of certain invasive plants and introduction of new species. Longer growing seasons means more production for these plants and more seeds in the seed bed. So that's what we're seeing with climate change. So some of the key threats that invasives pose, and I want to make sure that these stick out to you. So they displace native vegetation, they reduce plant diversity, and they alter soil chemistry and disrupt food chains. So those are some of the main key threats that invasive plants pose to our forests. So what does this mean for the Chesapeake Bay? Trees absorb large amounts of water, cool the environment, and remove harmful substances from soil and water. Urban areas with greater tree cover significantly reduce runoff, especially when trees are planted near impervious surfaces and waterways. No hate to grasslands. I think they're incredible. They're amazing, but obviously we have different natural areas that have different impacts. So when you're looking at a forested area or a forest patch, there's many different ways for that water to be held in like the tree canopy or down into the understory, and for that water to eventually move back up into the atmosphere instead of going straight down into our stormwater. So that means, less sediment runoff into our waterways, less pollution. You get where I'm going. Riparian forest buffers along streams further enhance water quality by stabilizing banks, filtering pollutants, regulating temperature, and supporting aquatic life. The number one thing that you could do for a buffer, any type of waterway, is to plant trees. We see a lot of really expensive engineering going into a lot of our waterways in order to get them better water quality. However, one of the things that we found through research is that often the cheapest option, planting trees, is the way to do it, and maintaining that forested buffer to allow for more native species. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over some of the common invasive species in our region. I would say these are definitely some of the more threatening items. A lot of the things that, as a forest health technician, I look at and that I just really hate to see are the vines. The vines really like to climb up the trees. They tend to girdle the tree, which means they can actually cut into the trunk of the tree, and it cuts off nutrients from, just circulating throughout the tree. What it can also do is, once they've reached a certain level of invasion, they are blocking the sunlight from reaching the leaves and the tree, and then you're feeding the invasive vine, but you're not feeding the tree. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the more common ones that I'm seeing out here is roundleaf bittersweet. Sometimes people call this oriental bittersweet. It has a really obvious like orangish berry in the fall time. You might be familiar with seeing it. That is probably the time when it's most easy to identify. However, at that point, you have to be really careful when you're going to remove it because it does have the seeds. We always recommend that if you are going to remove anything with the fruit attached, that you try to bag that and try to keep it from, being carried off into another area to reinvade it. So it is more of a woody vine. It can reach up to 100 feet. It's got more glossy, alternate leaves. It's got this like kind of like, let's see, it's like a finely toothed type of leaf. Um, and like I said, we've got the leaves that turn yellow, and then the orange, like bright orange berries. The treatment vines can be pulled out by the roots, cut repeatedly, or treated with systemic herbicides until you've kind of depleted the energy supply in those shoots. So herbicide is probably the fastest option, but not everybody's comfortable with that, and I recognize that. So it's one of those things you have to go back to. Another one is wineberry. Another one that's really easy to identify. A lot of people really love wineberry. It's really tasty. We just don't want it in our natural areas. What it does is it covers the understory and shades out a lot of new native species from coming in, and it's not very good cover for our wildlife in the area. It is a multi-stem shrub can get up to 6 feet high. The leaves are alternate. The fruits are a bright red raspberry-like berry. We do have a handful, I think there's maybe 2 native species of blackberry in the state, but I would say that most of this type of like raspberry looking fruit, it's typically not native to here. Although, like I said, they're good eating. So you can have like a host, maybe a little pick and pull at your congregation. Invite people out to try the fruit and everything. And then you get the berries and you eat them, and we're going to do something with them. Maybe we'll make jam, maybe we'll do something fun with them, but then we can go and we make sure we bag everything up so that we don't have any of those seeds remaining in the seed bed. But those are really popular. Next slide. Another really obvious one is going to be porcelain berry. Again, you're going to see the fruit on this on the porcelain berry into the fall. It's a vigorous invader of open and wooded habitats where it shades out native shrubs and young trees. Again, just pulling that young vine up by hand to remove the rootstock, and then systemic herbicide is going to be more effective in the short term. You can use glyphosate or tricloper to cut stems or leaves to kill the entire plant, including the roots. Multiflora rose, another really obvious one, grows aggressively and produces large numbers of fruits that are eaten and dispersed by a variety of birds. Again, that frequent repeated cutting or mowing at the rate of 3 to 6 times per year. So that repeated treatment is what's needed for a lot of these things because they are so good at staying alive and coming back. Next slide. We've also got privet, which is, it's the Chinese, European border and garden privets. They're typically sold in a lot of your big box nurseries. However, I believe at least one of them is on the list. You cannot sell it in Maryland, I believe. But just be careful of any type of privet. They reproduce very quickly, and they can spread all throughout the understory of a forested area. And they are a vector for ticks because we have lots of issues with, so if you go into an area with lots of privet, check yourself for ticks and just prepare yourself that is a consequence of having a heavily invaded area with privet. They can grow up to 8 to 20 feet high. Again, cut and bag the fruits to prevent spread by birds. Hand pull or dig up the seedlings and younger plants. Large plants can also be cut and treated with a systemic herbicide again. Another one we got here is the Japanese honeysuckle. Everybody's got really fond, probably childhood memories of honeysuckle. However, as much as pretty as it is, right? Because we brought it here for a reason, probably pretty, or we thought it was useful, right? But again, it's one of those things that can take over and it can block out sunlight for our native species. It is perennial deciduous to semi-evergreen. It's got those like hairy stems. They have like this reddish brown, light brownish color. The leaves are opposite and ovate to oblong. So if you kind of look at the shape of that, you can kind of tell what I mean. The flowers are more of like a tubular shape and bilaterally symmetrical. And I'm sorry, I don't quite see the bottom of my slide here. I'm trying to, oh yeah, just again, pulled by hand, removed, and treated with systemic herbicide. Next slide. So so poison ivy, it is native. However, sometimes even in the Forest Service and the Park Service, we still treat poison ivy, right? Because it can be a hazard to visitors, it can be a hazard to human enjoyment, and in some cases, it can even be a ladder for invasives to climb up. So if you are in a if you're facing heavy invasion from other competing invasives and you're finding that your poison ivy is creating a ladder for those to kind of move their way up the tree, you might choose to cut back poison ivy. However, um, it is a Maryland native and a valuable food source. So I don't like to say that we get rid of poison ivy, but you might ask why DNR would sometimes remove it from some of our natural areas. All right, next slide. Oh shoot, it didn't do the pop quiz like I wanted it to. That's okay. So we'll just kind of go over these again. They're just the same. So we've got the wineberry here. Ivy can choke the canopy of trees, right? I've got that question in there. Yes, it can. And you can see it, it'll move up into the canopy and you'll start to see well, wait, no, I'm sorry, for whatever reason in my head, I'm thinking English ivy because that will invade, but it will not I'm sorry, poison ivy, it can still move into the canopy, but just like native grape, it is meant to be here. And if we did not have all of these, like the suite of invasives that we're dealing with, we wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the laddering effect. But poison ivy, when left to its own devices, is not an issue for our native plant or trees. Um, so we'll kind of skip the pop quiz, especially since we have, yes. So English ivy, definitely yes. Yeah, you'll see a lot of that where it's shading out and blocking the sunlight. Quickly, we'll kind of go over tools and safety. Usually when I do these in person, I can be a little more like I can actually show you how the tool works, but I can't really do that here. So I'll kind of like try to go into some detail about it. So one of the cool things that we work with a lot is a weed wrench. That's really helpful as a manual removal tool. Uh, the weed wrench allows you to cut kind of at the base of a vine or a shrub or something like that. And then what you do is there's this like smaller area on the weed wrench where you can kind of see you would put the vine or the base into, and then you basically it's like it's like a pivot and it's just pulls it right up out of the ground and removes the roots. You can use that also to like kind of maybe pull up some trouble roots as well. But then you can also choose to treat with systemic herbicide with any of these items as well. We've got a chainsaw here, pretty easy to you see why you would use that. Larger trees that need felling, like a Bradford pear or a tree of heaven. Actually, with tree of heaven, if you want to treat it properly, you really just don't want to mess with it unless you are willing to treat it with herbicide because it will continue to resprout. So I don't even want to put that out there. Same with Bradford pear, but sometimes we've got to get creative. And there are some things that you do want to use herbicide with, or it will become more of a problem than if you maybe had just left it alone in some cases, or if you don't come back and repeatedly remove the issue, if that makes sense, so that it kind of exhausts itself. Um, we've got pruning shears, which I always recommend. I really like these as opposed sometimes to loppers, which are down at the bottom, like the smaller. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat a little bit as well. The pruning shears I really like for like grabbing a few different vines, like smaller vines, and then just like holding them and cutting, as opposed to taking shears or loppers and like getting down and having to stoop and like cut every single vine. Those are really nice for that. We've also got like the pull saw, which this is not like a pull saw chainsaw. This is more like just a manual one. This can allow you to cut away at vines that are in the tree higher up if you don't want to do that kind of like if you want to give that like big window cutting. And since I'm discussing a window cutting, I can talk about what I mean when I say that. A window cutting is like kind of a standard way of cutting away at a vine. What you would normally do is you're going to cut as low and close to the ground as you can at a vine, and then really as high as you can to the top. Some people like it's more like, if you can do a foot, it's also about ability, what you can do. So however much space you can leave in between for that window cutting, that's awesome because what that will do is that will actually allow the vine to dry out and then die off. And you don't have to necessarily remove it unless you really want that like clean appearance because it will no longer be a threat to the tree. Um, we've also got the loppers. Those are for maybe the bigger vines. You need a little more heft to cut those. We've also got our string trimmer and tri-blade brush cutter. I love that thing. Love the hedge cutter for some of that like wineberry, some of those things that are, it's just nice to just mow it all down. Again, PPE, 100%. You need to wear PPE when you're out working with these tools, especially if you're out working, with some of these like things that have thorns or have some like chemical irritant when you're pulling them. We always recommend if you're going to wear a chainsaw, you should wear long sleeves, leather boots, long pants, eye, ear, and helmet, and then hands and chaps. Same thing for a lot of these other tools, except for obviously you're not really going to need the chaps. Um, and then just use your best judgment. If you're working somewhere where you're a little bit worried that, like maybe I'm cutting away like at some vines at the bottom and nothing's really happening. But maybe we see some snags up top that we got, or some widowmakers up top that we've got to be aware of. So maybe we wear a helmet. Next slide, please. All right. So one of the things that kind of inspired our partnership with IPC with some of the invasives removal was a project called Third Haven Friends Meeting Group out in it's in Easton, Maryland, and that was obviously on the Eastern Shore. It's a Quaker congregation. They have several historic trees on the property, and we hosted a work day out at Third Haven Friends Meeting Group with the congregation. Next slide, please. So we attacked a little area. Actually, so this picture you're looking at with this vine area and then all of these trees in the background, that was actually a restoration site for a waterway. They had done it was a riparian buffer restoration, and it had been very heavily invaded with invasive plants. And what we did over the course of, I believe, is like 1.5 hours and just a few people. Next slide. Oh, maybe we didn't get it. That's okay. All right. So, well, anyway, just to let you know that the entire area that was covered with vines was cleared away, and it was the impact was crazy. Like you could just see that just with a few people and a little bit of work, like the impact was awesome. And obviously, they're going to have to come back to it, but sometimes just getting out there and taking the time to do the work really pays off. And again, this is an example of the window cut. This is what this person could do. This is how much space they could leave for the ivy. But that's what they were able to accomplish in that time. Like that was what their ability level allowed them to do. They were able to sit at the base of the tree. That was comfortable for them. They worked for an hour and 15 minutes and they made a nice little dent in the English ivy that's invading this tree. All right. All right. And so, I always like to ask, how can we assist? Obviously, we're going to take some questions here at the end, but just be keeping that in the back of your mind and thinking maybe how we could help, DNR could help with some of your projects within your congregation. We have a tree planting program, and then we also have a beginning invasive species management program for some of our public and private partners. I always highly recommend these two pieces of literature for any of your invasives management projects. Plant Invaders Field Guide is awesome. It goes into detail on, you know, what the plant looks like, how to treat it, when to treat it, what do you want to do? Like, it is a very good resource for that. So there's a QR code and a link attached. And then this is actually, the next one is a DNR publication, and it's called Good Green, Homeowner's Guide to Managing Invasive Plants. And that's also a really awesome resource for folks that are just getting into this work. And again, we didn't really go into forest pests, but we get a lot of questions about things like spotted lanternfly and sightings of certain, bugs we really don't want to see out there. And I always recommend that people reach out to the forest pest management team because they're more of a response team, but I also take questions about that. So, yep. And that is pretty much, I think, it for me. And then we have sources.
Thank you so much, Kari. I just wanted to make mention, I love the idea of the pick and pull. I think that's a fantastic idea that I could see a lot of our congregations doing to get their members involved. And I also didn't know that poison ivy was a native. I've been here practically my whole life. And how did I not know poison ivy was native? So that was just a great, informative, and very practical presentation for our audience. So grateful for that. I want to make sure that I give the floor to our next speaker, and I want to introduce Lindsay Cathcart. He's the Forest Resilience Manager at Rock Creek Conservancy. We also have a great partnership with this organization. They're doing some amazing restorative work throughout the Rockville area. They've been working to restore Rock Creek through invasive plant management and reforestation since 2021. And prior to working at Rock Creek Conservancy, Lindsay has managed educational programs for the North American Invasive Species Management Association and has a background in ecological research and biodiversity monitoring. I want to welcome Lindsay. Please take the floor. Feel free to unmute, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you all tonight, and I think we can go ahead and dive in. Next slide. So I'm here on behalf of Rock Creek Conservancy. We are the watershed organization for the Rock Creek watershed. Rock Creek meanders 33 miles through Montgomery County, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., crossing federal lands as well as district, city, county, and state boundaries. The creek is a tributary of the Potomac River, and that will empty into the ocean via the bay. Next slide. Our mission is to restore Rock Creek as a natural oasis for all people to appreciate and protect. Next slide. So as the voice of Rock Creek and the Friends Group to Rock Creek Park, a national park, the Conservancy recruits and trains volunteers who become environmental stewards. We empower the next generation of Rock Creek stewards through paid summer service learning. I'll talk a little bit about one of those projects. We educate park visitors about ways to reduce impacts on Rock Creek while enjoying the park. We restore mini oases as demonstrations of the restoration needed throughout the watershed, and we advocate for the protection of the watershed and Rock Creek Park. Next slide. So what are invasive species and why should I care? Next slide. So an invasive species is defined by an executive order as a non-native species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So sometimes people throw around words like exotic or alien, as well as weed. So in this case, we are talking about things that specifically are both exotic and harmful to the ecosystem. And so this image here on the right is the invasive process model. I think it's really important to understand how something becomes invasive because, yes, today we have a bajillion invasive plants, especially here in the Chesapeake Bay region. And that problem is only going to continue to get worse unless we can stop the spread. So if you take a look, there are many steps that it takes from something becoming introduced to a new area to then actually becoming invasive. So first, it needs to be transported to a new range where it hasn't evolved, over a long period of time. Once something is transported, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it may survive or it may not. If it survives, it might be able to reproduce and it might not. If it is able to reproduce, then it might be able to spread and move across the landscape, or it might have this very small localized population. So once we see that something is spreading across the landscape and it's able to establish and sustain a population, we can look at whether that species has an impact. And if it does have an impact, it is definitely defined as invasive at that point. Next slide. So why are some species invasive? And I think this touches on some of the things that Kari talked about, but I just want to drill in a couple of really important features. So invasive plants often are able to become invasive from their accidental or intentional introduction because they have some of these characteristics. They are highly adaptable to disturbance. They tolerate a broad range of environmental conditions. They produce a large number of seeds or other reproductive parts. They have a high germination success. They are perhaps able to spread by runners or rhizomes. So these are vegetative or asexual ways of reproducing below ground. And they also have a lack of co-evolved species, including predators and pathogens. So if we talk about something like a native grapevine, there are lots of insects that have evolved with our native grapevines that will eat the foliage of those grapevines. It'll keep those grapevines from becoming, having a negative impact. Whereas if you talk about an invasive vine, like this picture of mile a minute or porcelain berry, we don't have the diseases or the insects that know how to eat these plants and keep them under control. Where we come in. Next slide. So invasives can be introduced intentionally by humans or accidentally. For hundreds of years, humans have been moving plants around the globe for food, medicine, or landscaping, as well as other purposes. And we see that many of the invasive plants in our area are exotic ornamentals that were introduced for horticulture and have escaped garden settings into natural areas. Next slide. So why should we manage invasive species? Because if you talk to anybody who does this work, we'll tell you how hard it is. But it's really important to protect natural areas and resources from the harmful impacts of invasive species. Doing this work is important to support biodiversity and to promote a healthy, functional ecosystem across the landscape. And it looks like, yeah, I had another image on here, so I think everything got squashed. But this is a great example. This picture is a diversity of spring ephemeral wildflowers. I had another picture on here of a before shot of a floodplain that was covered in one invasive species, lesser celandine. After managing lesser celandine for close to a decade in Rock Creek Park, we've been able to see an amazing diversity, about 10 different species of wildflowers that have recolonized the area following management. So there's lots of this native vegetation hiding. It's waiting in the seed bank. It's waiting for its opportunity. So if we can lend a helping hand, we can help restore that biodiversity. Next slide. So what is the best way to control invasive species? Next. I love the expression from Ben Franklin. He said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's the same thing with invasives. So the best way to manage an invasive is to prevent it from becoming invasive in the first place. So this image is called the invasion curve. On the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is control and area infested. And I do see a question in the chat, so I'll make sure I hop on and answer those when I'm done presenting. So over time, a population of an invasive plant is going to grow and spread exponentially. If you look at the right side of this image where our graph is red and orange, this is a species that is highly widespread and infested. These are things like Kari talked about, multiflora rose, wineberry, porcelain berry. These are very expensive to manage. And certainly in small settings and in digestible projects like things on your private property or your local parks, it might be possible to eradicate, but in general, it is beyond the scope of our budgets to think about eradicating something like multiflora rose from the Chesapeake Bay, at least at this time. But if you move back left across this image, you see when you have something that has a very low population size, it's early in its introduction, it is possible to eradicate those things. So this is where the idea of early detection and rapid response comes in. This refers to coordinated actions to identify potential new invasive species and take actions to manage them. So a lot of the work that I do at Rock Creek Conservancy not only serves Rock Creek, but we are a part of a group called the National Capital PRISM, which stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And so we are able to communicate with land managers all across the National Capital Region and point out things like, hey, I'm seeing a lot of Nandina, a common house plant. Seeing a lot of that in our parks here. Are you guys seeing it in Virginia? Yes, no. So we can see maybe new emerging trends and we can coordinate our actions so that way we can snuff out these potential new invasives. So always good to both learn your really common abundant species, but then also be looking out for what's new and what can we get under control before it becomes a problem. All right, next slide. So we would like to recommend applying an integrated approach to invasive plant management in order to maximize your impact. This diagram is part of an integrated pest management framework. And next slide. So if we start at the base of this pyramid, the best thing that you can do, like I just said, is prevention. It's not just across the landscape, but you think about, on your own property or your own local areas, doing things like cleaning your shoes, even maybe the tires of your vehicle. Those are great magnets for seeds. If you go out on a muddy day and you take a hike, maybe you go off trail because you want to take a picture of something. You might be picking up seeds in the mud, in the tread of your shoes. Imagine you go and you take a hike somewhere else the next day, and you might actually move those seeds to a new landscape. So we want to make sure that we are preventing the spread of invasives. So being clean is a good way to do that. If you're going to take a road trip, maybe check your wheel well for spotted lanternfly before you leave town. Now, if we move up the pyramid, we'll talk about cultural control. This refers to adopting practices to prevent invasions, like planting dense ground cover. So I'll talk about one of our projects where seeding turf grass is a method of cultural control. It's not a native species, but it is preventing the regrowth of invasives. Above that is mechanical. So Kari talked about great tools. So a lot of good work can be done with just a pair of gloves and your hands. I love the polar bear like she talked about. So I think that's a great tool to invest in. Now, next step up is biological control. So using living organisms, including diseases, to control others. However, this is not something that typically the individual homeowner or property manager is really involved in. So I would just exercise a lot of caution because this is a way you might accidentally do more harm than good. And then at the top of the pyramid is chemical. So it's the smallest part of the pyramid, but it is still important. Somebody asked in the chat about Japanese knotweed earlier, and that's one of those species where, in my experience, we can't control it without chemicals. So, applying the right approach and applying a suite of approaches is going to maximize your impact. Next slide. So I want to give a brief overview of a project that we've been working on at the Strathmore Mansion next to the Strathmore Music Center in Rockville or North Bethesda, Maryland. This is a picture taken in spring of 2023, and behind their mansion, they had this mess of huge bushes covered in all porcelain berry. There were a few trees, but really it's just a mess of total invasive cover. So if we go to the next slide, I mentioned earlier that we employ summer service learning as a model in our work. So every year we hire 10 students to come out and get their first paid environmental job. So in 2023, we had an awesome team working at Strathmore, and they did all this manual and mechanical removal over the course of 6 weeks. If we go to the next slide, I just have a whole bunch of pics we can look at. These students work extremely hard, and as they started peeling away these layers and layers of porcelain berry, we found, oh, there's actually some trees under here too. So they weren't dead yet. So really exciting to get in there and unearth some little mysteries. Next slide. So that was the work done in 2023. It was a lot of work. That was 12 to 15 feet high of vegetation. It was extremely dense. So we did a ton of mechanical removal in that first year. Then in the spring of 2024, we went in and we planted a couple of small trees and shrubs, but we weren't quite ready. It wasn't, 1 year wasn't enough to get it in full planting shape. This is, oh yeah, it looks like a few of we missed a couple pictures here. So apologies. The summer of 2024, when we went back to this site, the crew didn't have nearly so much big, huge bushy vegetation to remove, but they did have roots. So I have one here. They spent most of their time digging out huge root systems from the porcelain berry and the bush honeysuckle. So they were able to do a lot of really effective management without chemicals. Now we did bring in a contractor to work for a day at the end of all of their work, just to spray any things that couldn't be removed manually. So I'm really pleased with the work that these hardworking young people were able to do with very minimal chemical use. And now we're getting ready. We've got a dozen or so trees in the ground, and we're going to put in about 100 shrubs and trees at the end of this fall. So I'm very excited to see that transformation. This is a great example of afforestation. So this was not a forest before. It was an invasive shrub thicket. And at one point before that was just kind of mowed grass that got abandoned. So really excited to increase the tree canopy in the bay. Next slide. Yeah, so here's a picture from this spring. We got a couple trees in the ground, but we'll see some more this fall. All right, next slide. I know we're getting close to time here, so I just want to kind of close out with a couple of other lessons. So managing invasives, it's obviously very important, but we hope that if you are working maybe on your congregation's land, on your property, that you can pair that with native plant landscaping. So most big box stores are still stocking invasive plants. You might see plants both in like stores and catalogs have labels like disease tolerant, deer tolerant, produces a lot of fruit, bird friendly. And those can be kind of like red herrings for invasive. Like we talked about all these characteristics of why something might be invasive. And I have found plenty of new invasive species, things that are not as commonly talked about, sold in catalogs and being labeled as bird friendly, because they produce all this fruit. And it's really discouraging to see that the landscaping trade is continuing to contribute to the spread. So not all plants with the potential to be invasive are listed as invasive. This means if you are doing any kind of gardening, it is so important that you look up a species by its Latin name, not just its common name, in order to learn where that species comes from before purchasing. So be an educated buyer. It does take a little bit more work, but it will, the information is very important. If you plant smaller sizes, things like plugs, bare roots, you might have to buy in a large quantity, but this might be an opportunity where you and others are working on multiple projects. Maybe you can order one big order of plants and divide it amongst yourself, and that would be the most cost-effective way to plant. And I just put here the name of a couple of nurseries that we've used. Next slide. So how should I be a good steward of property? First, comply by your state, county, or your jurisdiction's rules and regulations. So I know there's things going on in the chat about what chemicals should I use for this plant. Not all chemicals are available and legal depending on your state. So Look at things like your state's extension services for resources about what is available to purchase in your state. Define your goals. Are you trying to manage a property to be aesthetically beautiful and support pollinators? Or are you looking to support all biodiversity? Are you looking to reduce stormwater? So start with defining your goals, and then you can do research relevant to your ecosystem. You want to work toward eradicating invasive plants and preventing their spread. You want to landscape with native plants. This part's really important. Share your story with your neighbors, your friends, your congregation, and build a community that shares this ethic and interest in stewardship. It's much easier if you have a project to maybe invite a couple friends out to help you, and then you can return the favor for them down the line. Again, ask for help. So at Rock Creek Conservancy, I'm always happy to help people both in the watershed or outside of it. Reach out if you're kind of stuck on where to start with a project, but look for your local organizations as well. And people are often very happy to help and excited to know that this work's being done. So no impact is too small. All right, and lastly, go to the next slide. I wanted to leave with this image. This is the 12 pillars of permaculture. This is an idea that we don't often talk about when we talk about managing natural resources, but I think it's really important to think about very holistically about what you're doing with your project. Because some people, maybe they want to grow food plants that are not native, and I think that is okay. I think that's an ethical use of your land. So I think referring to these kinds of pillars are a good way to make sure that the work that you're doing is sustainable. Okay, and next slide. I believe Sarah's dropping a bunch of these links in the chat. So we have events at Rock Creek Park every weekend. We rotate through different parts of the park. So we're always happy to have you out and get your hands dirty, answer your questions, learn from each other. We have a webinar that we did last year that delved into the idea of communicating about invasive species in an inclusive way. So I encourage you to check that out. And then just echoing Kari with the resources that she shared. Next slide. That is it from me. I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you all for the work that we do. I am super excited to see that there's so many people enthusiastic about invasive plant management and being good stewards. So do please reach out to me or my organization. And we're always happy to hear about the good work that's being done and provide guidance. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I just wanted to make mention, as a visual learner, I greatly appreciate the early detection rapid response graph. That was a good visual for me to put in perspective how invasives are managed. And there was a great invasive process model that you provided to kind of help just kind of guide folks. So just some really great resources. I did put all the links in the chat, but we'll also follow up in our post recording. So especially those in the Rockville area, please check those out. Again, I want to be respectful of time. And so we have two last speakers of the evening that both are coming from Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Glencoe, which is Baltimore County. That's actually a part of the Gunpowder Falls watershed. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Jane or Rudy. I believe that's the Gunpowder Falls watershed. And they have been doing some amazing work. And so we're going to open up the floor. I believe Mary Jane will start us off, and then Rudy's also going to talk about some of this invasive species projects that they've been removing on their property. So please welcome Mary Jane and Rudy Horner. Okay. Mary Jane, if you want to go ahead and unmute. Yeah, sorry.
All right.
There you are.
Hi. Well, a couple of years ago, we shared our experience creating a monarch way station on the edge of an acre of meadow that is located on a slope downhill from our cemetery, and that's very overgrown with some tough invasive plants. The garden was phase 1 of a 2-phase plan. Phase 2 is turning the entire acre into a native plant meadow. We didn't tell you at that time that because of the harsh conditions in that area and the amount of invasives, that a native landscaper and some other consultants advised us to just skip phase one, skip the garden, and instead apply herbicide to the entire area and do a mass seeding. But we just really weren't ready to take that advice. We had our minds set on the garden. We knew we had the resources to do it. And we also knew that some of the people on our team and in our congregation had really strong feelings about using herbicides. Now, that was in 2017, 8 years ago. And since then, we have tried various ways to kill the invasives without herbicides and introduced Maryland natives to the area outside the garden. We have transplanted natives into bare spots. We have done a lot of solarization of different areas using black plastic to try to, if not kill the invasives, to suppress them. And then we planted those areas with natives, or we transplanted natives. And in 2023, we decided to seed a large area with a pound of deer-resistant seed mix combined with rye seeds for a cover crop and rice hulls for spreadability. And then we cover the whole area with straw. Before that, we had put the black plastic down and solarized it. And then we also had to do some spot killing with herbicide for really resistant weeds. But anyway, we got it done. We have had some successes with these methods. We have established common milkweed in some places, patches of mountain mint, and some other transplants have survived here and there. And this year we are seeing in the seeded area, it took about 2 or 3 years for us to see anything. We're seeing wild bergamot, brown-eyed Susans, and some other natives. But the area is really still dominated by invasives. We have Japanese stiltgrass, mile-a-minute mugwort, horseweed, Chinese silvergrass. And we just feel if they aren't not eliminated, that eventually they will overwhelm any of the good that we have done in this area. So time has marched on. It has taken us with it. Experience has made us realize that planting section by section could take years and might be a waste of time and resources in the end because of the persistence of these invasive plants. So this year, when we were again advised to treat and seed the entire area, we were ready to listen. We've received an estimate of about $200 from Natural Lawn for applying a herbicide and spreading a custom seed mix that would cost about $800. The herbicide will be applied carefully to protect our native solitary bee boxes and our bat boxes and the areas where we have established natives. And we know that we're going to need to continue monitoring and managing the invasives and reseeding from time to time. But we hope that in a couple of years, we'll be able to report to you that we are well on our way to creating a native plant meadow. So working with IPC for the last few years has inspired us to expand our efforts as a creation care ministry to our entire campus. So last year, we began to tackle a mass of invasive shrubs and vines to make way for planting native trees and shrubs through the Trees for Sacred Places program. And I'm going to turn this over to Rudy Horner to tell you about that.
If you'd hold on to this picture, this is the main picture to talk about. And I just want to say that our work is very similar to what Lindsay was showing in that the plants are up over our head and they're across the meadow from where we have the garden. So this is not contiguous, but it's all part of our campus, and it's what I call the far hillside. And we have about a 1 acre area. So the picture from above, all that dark green, that's what we're trying to get rid of. We have done it in several phases. We've taken care of the autumn olives first. About 4 years ago, I had no idea what an autumn olive was until a tree contractor pointed one out to me, and then I realized we needed to start doing something about them, and we had a huge clump of them at the top of the hillside. And so we got rid of those first, and then we looked down the hill and we saw this solid swath of invasives. I mean, every single invasive that's local: multiflora rose, privet, barberry, honeysuckle, grapevine, cherry trees, bittersweet, wineberry, and all in there, so thick that the deer have made little rooms in there. So we found out about the IPC Trees for Sacred Places, and so who can say no to free trees? So we turned our attention to this 1 acre that we knew had to be cleared out, and we submitted our application saying, we've started on it. We had a Zoom call with IPC, and then we had a visit with 2 DNR representatives that came and looked at it, and they said, yeah, you will qualify if you get rid of all those invasives. So this part is in the upper right-hand picture here that's on the screen, that you see a little cleared area on the left, and then it just goes all the way across, and it's about 1 acre, and half of it is across the property line with our neighbors. Our neighbors own about 200 acres. They are very environmentally committed, and this little area they can't even see, and it's a very low priority for them, but they're very happy that it's a high priority for us. So they're very supportive. So we have their support, and we are going ahead. We have contacted contractors who do this process called forest mulching, which is a brand new process for me, where the machine grabs the foliage and then chews it up. And so the estimate is that it'll take 2 days to clear the 1 acre here. It will cost $3,000, and day 1 is tomorrow. So we are very, very excited about this, and we hope that if all goes well, we will have our 1 acre of cleared space, and then we can go back to DNR and say, we can qualify, we hope, and we hope that we can get on the DNR schedule for the afforestation for either this fall or next spring. Sarah, I'm finished.
Thank you, Rudy. I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for showing just a few last bit of slides. I'm very grateful. One, Mary Jane, again, you've come before to talk about the pollinator meadows, and what a beautiful story that you've woven from the previous time with your team, and really being transparent with folks that, you guys kind of had somewhat of an issue, and it's taken time, right? I think some folks get overwhelmed. So it's just, I'm very grateful that, you've shared your story and look at where it's heading. So I am sure you'll qualify. That was a lot of work, and you've put a lot of, just a lot of time and love into it. So thank you so much for both coming. I cannot believe the hour has just flown by. I did see some questions and answers in the chat. So if my speakers wouldn't mind, if they'd be so gracious to just spend maybe just 1 or 2 more minutes with us, I'd love to close the program with a prayer. And then that way, whoever wants to stay and has a question, we can answer that afterwards. Thank you also, Rebecca, for putting that slide. I'll put the link for the survey in the chat in just a moment. But as we close every program with a reflection, this one I wanted to find, it was a little unique. This is a prayer from the Jewish tradition, and it's just a small reflection and understanding that springtime brings with its special blessing of thanks. This blessing recited upon seeing fruit trees in bloom. Thanks God for a perfect world filled with trees and creations for us to enjoy. And so all of these natives that we talked about, especially edible forest, what a wonderful way to close the program with that reflection. Thank you so much. If we could just go back to the last slide with the survey link, I will put that in the chat and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So yeah, just let us know what you think. Your feedback helps improve our program. We greatly appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much, Anna, for also putting that in for me. So if we could just stop share for a moment and just open up the floor. Thank you, Lindsay and Kari, for both answering questions during the chat, during the program in the chat. I'm just going to make sure we didn't miss any. And in the meantime, does anyone want to unmute if you had a question you wanted to ask? Or raise your hand while we have our speakers here.
I have a question.
Yes, Carl.
Yeah, hi. Actually, two. One, maybe Kari, I could contact you later. I think one of the big issues for our area in Montgomery County is the county regulations on the parks that prohibit use of herbicides by anyone essentially but park officials. So if you could help us on that, I'd like to talk to you. The second is Japanese knotweed is really just spreading like crazy along the creeks and also into the woodlands here. It's extremely hard to get rid of. I can conquer anything else. I wondered if you had any recommendations on that.
As of now, I mean, well, one, for what you're discussing with Montgomery County, we can talk about that. We have had to kind of like a lot of our state parks, we've had to work through concerns about, you know, who's applicating, what work is being done, that type of thing. So we can kind of help work through that. The other, knotweed is really tough. I am not the expert on that. And it's one of the things that like, what I would say, what I'm seeing is like most of the treatment that I'm seeing that's even taking place is like, it's like highway administration doing like, and we're not like a lot of our DNR lands, like there's some treatment of it, but they're more so like mowing it back. I don't even think they're like treating it at this point. I don't know if they've been able to like kind of wrap their arms around the situation because it is difficult to treat. But like I think Lindsay had responded in the chat that they have not been able to do much control of it without herbicide. And I would say from what I'm hearing from my other colleagues that that's probably the same that they're seeing. So
Yeah, even with herbicides, I found it's impossible to stop.
That's one of those tough ones. We're hoping that something comes along that, you know, it's one of those, you know, even a few years like wavy leaf basket grass, we weren't sure, you know, we were trying to get a handle on how to treat that or these new things that come along. So maybe get a few years in between it and we can kind of see, you know, what they've come up with after a few years. But as of right now, I don't have any new insights into it, but maybe Lindsay does.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't have the magic like silver bullet, but I would say, you know, you're talking about how there's a lot of it on the stream and it's creeping into the forest. So I would focus your efforts at the invasion front. So where you have the new growth that's starting to spread, don't start at the creek side where you've got a million plants because you'll never get it under control. But when you've got little bits of plants, you actually might have a chance of being able to uproot those or repeatedly cut them back throughout the growing season. And that way you'll at least prevent it from growing in its population.
Maybe I can follow up with you because
please do.
Been very unsuccessful so far.
Yeah, what a great point, Lindsay, on don't tackle it at the origin, especially where we have congregations that have larger properties where it's creeping. That's where you could probably spend the most effort and help it from, you know, just taking over. We will provide all of the organizations and contact information again in the post recording. So thank you so much. Again, the speakers, you've been amazing. And all of the questions I just checked were already answered in the chat. So thank you for really being on top of it. It's been such an informative and practical presentation. I think this is a conversation we will continue on. And for the folks that haven't seen our October Learning Lab, we will do a final one just on the invasive insects. So yeah, this is a very interesting topic. We are so grateful that you spent your Thursday evening with us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.